40 million. 40 million Americans are suffering from food insecurity today. Hunger is an issue that has been going on for far too long and we have overlooked for far too long. This has especially impacted young people because college students alone, 30% of college students are food insecure. I know about hunger because for the first 8 years that I lived in the United States, I lived with just my mother, who's a single mother and gets paid a very low wage. And she had to pay for everything. She had to pay for our car, the rent, my school supplies, insurance, everything. And if it wasn't for the food stamps that we received, then we would have been hungry too. We would have probably gone meals without eating, maybe even days without eating. And this isn't just something that happened to me and a few other people. No. According to NBC News, this has happened to 1 in 5 families. That's why today we're going to talk about the problems that families face while they're trying to feed themselves. And organizations like Feeding South Florida and others can help us. Now, I hope you save some space because I'm going to give you another spoonful of information. Let's try to think about how our society will worsen if we don't face the hunger issues in our community and what we can do to help. Now, according to Feeding Florida, 2.8 million Floridians lack access to healthy food. 2.8 million Floridians alone. This is people that are receiving government help and are still struggling to fend for themselves. And this level of necessity means that 850,000 children are struggling to be fed. Also, according to Feeding America, $1.5 billion are given every year to families struggling with food insecurity. But it isn't enough because in the 21st century, we shouldn't have hunger. We shouldn't have child hunger. According to other programs like SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which a lot of people know as food stamps also, they generated $9.8 billion in 2014 alone. This is money that went to underprivileged individuals and food insecure individuals that was recycled in our economy, and it increased growth. It helped people like us that need help. Now, I have an infographic here that's going to help prove some of these points. Go. Sorry if you can't see too well. And there are a few key points that I want to mention in this infographic, like how 1 in 4 children are food insecure, how 21 million kids receive free lunch at school every day, how 44% of all SNAP recipients are children, how 76% of teachers say that they have students going into the classroom every day who are hungry, and how half of all the infants born receive WIC, which is another nutritional assistance program that goes to helping new parents and underprivileged parents buy groceries for a cheaper price like milk, eggs, and yogurt, just essentials, but it's helping families that need it. Now, let's think about what happens if we don't change this and the problem continues. Time magazine says that 1 in 13 older individuals struggle to fend for themselves. I know this is true because I have a neighbor, her name's Kari, who is in her 80s and her husband has sadly passed away, and she never had any kids, so she doesn't have anybody to take care of herself. The only money she has is her retirement checks, which frankly aren't enough for rent, her necessities, and her food. So if it wasn't for neighbors like my mother and myself and our other neighbors that try to help her by bringing her groceries and even leftover food sometimes that we want to give to her, she would probably go hungry. She might even, sadly to say, pass away because she's not being fed. Now, another problem, this is a problem especially important to college students, I feel like, because we're young, we're able, why shouldn't we be helping people like this? And wouldn't it be nice to know that once we reach that same age, there would be somebody that would be willing to help us? Another problem that we have is the amount of food that gets thrown away every day. 40% of all the food produced, that's almost half of all the food that's made in the United States, gets thrown out. And according to the book American Wasteland, Americans throw away 20% of the food they buy. 20% of what we buy, we just throw it out. Sometimes we don't even open it. The problem is that we have overlooked this for far too long, and nobody's taking an initiative. There is such a news overload that the problem of hunger has just been ignored, and nobody knows how big a deal it is right now. An example of this was Obama in 2008. He pledged to end childhood food insecurity. And 12 years later, we have, can you say 13? 13 million children are hungry today. And according to the Food and Research Center, kids that are faced with childhood insecurity at an early age have higher risks for asthma, anxiety, and depression. Those are 3 illnesses that could have everlasting effects that a child could never recover from just because they were hungry and we didn't help. I have another infographic to help prove these points. And here you can see that 1 out of the nation's poor are children. A third of the nation's poor are children. And how in 2007, I know it was a while ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. In 2007, the households at risk of being food deprived rose by almost 50%, by almost half. And according to the nation, all of the food insecure individuals have a greater population than Texas, Michigan, and Maine combined. That's a ridiculous amount for us to be in the 21st century with all that we can do. The Association of American Colleges and Universities says that 60% of college students struggle with food insecurity at least once a month. That means that every day there are college students that are going to class without eating. They're going to sleep without eating, because I know I have friends and I have classmates who have to worry about rent, tuition, textbooks. So they go entire days without eating sometimes because they can't afford to. The government isn't taking a big enough initiative in this, but that's not the problem. The problem is that we aren't either. If we don't do something, no one will. I hope you're ready for this last scoop of information, and hopefully it'll fulfill your stomachs. Because today I've highlighted an assortment of ideas that we have about how we could help solve hunger. I have also made very strong points about how families that are receiving government help are still struggling to fend for themselves. How families are having trouble finding food shelters and places where there's organic, healthy foods. And how much food we throw away every single day. It's ridiculous what's going on because nobody's paying attention. It's time we put a stop to this before it gets worse, because we have to. I hope that after everything I've told you today, you want to get up tomorrow and make a difference, make a change. Because like Mother Teresa once said, if you can't feed 100 people, just feed 1. Let's make a difference.